Good afternoon. Welcome to the October 23rd Delta Stewardship Council meeting. We'll begin with roll call, beginning to my far right.
Weinberg present.
Maronian present.
Gatto present.
Damrell present.
Fiorini here. We have 7 council members. We have a quorum. First item is an action item, file item number 3, adopting the September 27th meeting summary.
Move adoption.
Weinberg moves, Damrell seconds. Any discussion on the motion?
There is a correction to the meeting summary. The explanation of the vote. There was one abstention because Maria was not at the August meeting.
Oh, the approval of the
meeting summary.
September summary.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
That is.
We'll fix that.
We'll receive that correction. Anything else?
It notes that Maria made the motion to approve the August 23 meeting summary, and it was actually I who made
Council
the
member
motion.
Tatayan. Do we have that? Correct. So with that change, it's the maker and the second of the motion. Is that acceptable?
Yes.
Frank? Acceptable? Very good. Then let's vote.
Weinberg, aye.
Maronian, aye.
Fiorini, aye. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. File item number 4 under the chair's report. Do any council members have anything you wish to report? Hearing none, then we shall move on to file item number 5, Executive Officer's Report. Jessica Pearson.
Good afternoon. We sent 3 letters this last month on Delta Plan implementation and coordination. There are copies in your packet and also on the table and on our website. One letter was sent to the City of Stockton. The City of Stockton is working on a proposed upgrade to a wastewater treatment plant that discharges treated wastewater into the San Joaquin River just north of Highway 4. The upgrades will involve changes to many of their existing facilities and processes, and the project is intended to improve the reliability of the existing treatment process. So we will begin to offer early consultation to the City of Stockton, and you can read our letter for more details. We also sent a letter to the Tri-Valley San Joaquin Regional Rail Authority regarding their Valley Link Rail project, also extending our offer of early consultation and providing some advice for Delta Plan policies that they should consider in their planning process. Finally, we sent a letter to SMUD, Sacramento Municipal Utility District, as well, related to a draft environmental impact report for operations maintenance and a new habitat conservation plan. We are also currently in receipt of the Department of Water Resources intent to file a notice of certification of consistency for its North Delta Flood Control and Habitat Project. They posted a notice on October 15th on their own website, and so we expect that they will submit a certification on or after October 25th. The North Delta project consists of flood control and habitat improvements in Sacramento County, where the McCullumee River, Cosumnes River, Dry Creek, and Morrison Creek converge. Flood flows and high water conditions in this area threaten levees, bridges, and roadways. So the purpose of this project is to implement flood control improvements in a manner that also benefits aquatic and terrestrial habitat, species, and ecological processes. This is an eco-restore project and a project that staff have consulted on as well. In personnel announcements, my congratulations to Brittany Young, who accepted a promotion to Information Officer 2. In her 2+ years with the council, Brittany has elevated our social media program to the point where it's now a recognized leader among California state agencies. And in fact, she's hosting 25 state agency social media folks on Wednesday to share how she does it In this role, she'll help to oversee all of the council's communication efforts, improve our website, and produce videos and blogs. We hired a new attorney, Erica Georgie, who is a senior attorney at the California Air Resources Board and at the Department of Toxic Substances Control. She specialized in CEQA and rulemakings pursuant to the Administrative Procedures Act. Erica was also previously an attorney at the Bureau of State Audits and for the California District Attorneys Association. She attended law school at McGeorge. She has a master's from Sac State and a degree from UC San Diego. So I would like to welcome Erica, who do not believe is here today, but you will be seeing, some of you will be seeing over the next few days. And go Tritons. We have included this month our quarterly contract report, as is our custom. It's included in the binder. And if you have any questions about that report at any time, please let me or Jessica Law know. And with that, we will move to item 5C, which is requesting approval of the cooperative agreement with the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation for the Delta Science proposal solicitation.
This is an action item.
I'd like to invite Reiner Honicke up to the table to present.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Jessica, and council members. This is actually fairly exciting news because under the theme of One Delta, One Science, we managed to get 3 agencies to actually solicit proposals for science that is consistent with the Science Action Agenda that, as you may recall, the Delta Plan Interagency Implementation, the Delta Interagency Implementation Committee endorsed. I think it was last year. And under that Science Action Agenda, we put out a joint solicitation among Proposition 1 funds that were available through the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, funds the science program has available under with an augmented with a budget augmentation, 1-year budget augmentation of $2 million for this fiscal year, and the Bureau piggybacked with us and decided to use the same mechanism that we did to solicit projects with $2 million that they put into the joint pot. So with that, because it is more than $500,000 and that falls under Jessica's delegated authority, we're bringing that to you for your approval so we can award that money under our existing solicitation schedule. The proposal deadline is Friday, so we will have we will receive a number of we have about 40 proposals already in the works. We saw the website, and we expect to see several dozen proposals that are applicable for this solicitation. So with that, I just wanted to encourage you to approve acceptance of $2 million from the Bureau that we will help distribute.
Any questions?
Is this Rainer's last council meeting?
It is, and I'll say a few words about that in a minute.
If you have any questions about this, Josh Israel from the Bureau of Reclamation is here. He's the division chief for the science division in the regional office. And if you have any questions, he'd be happy to join me in answering them.
Okay.
I'll make a motion to accept the $2 million from the Bureau as per the staff recommendation.
All right. Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there any public comment on this? None. No requests for public comment. Ready for the question? Let's vote.
Weinberg, aye.
Marani and I.
Gatto, aye.
Damrell, aye.
Tatai and I.
Pierini, aye. Motion passes unanimously.
Yeah, thank you. Don't go anywhere yet, Reiner. No, I really appreciate the vote. We've come a long way since 2010. That was the council's first year in operation, and in the 8 years since, we've built a modest pot of funding to move forward these critical science investigations that we talk about all the time. And in fact, it's a part of the Delta Science Program's mission to fund science, which is kind of an unusual part of an agency's mission. And we've shown that growing these funds over the past few years has been successful in attracting other agencies that are part of our implementation committee to want to contribute to continue to grow that pot. And so this is definitely a success story, and in no small part attributed to Reiner's leadership. And this is Reiner's last council meeting. After 5.5 years with the council, he is retiring. And he's really worked hard to improve those science policy connections and to make sure that we have broadly endorsed strategic ways to fund science, like the Science Action Agenda. And we wouldn't be here without him, and I wanted to extend my thank you and appreciation.
Thank you.
And I wanted to add in just to say, you know, as lead scientist, Reiner and I work together very closely, and Reiner, from day one, has been unbelievably helpful to me, and I know unbelievably helpful to Cliff. I talked to Cliff a couple weeks ago, and Cliff had nothing but praise for Reiner's work and contribution. I'd say, yeah, on this, the $2 million, Reiner really was extremely instrumental in making it happen. It was connections with, it was his personal network that he's put together that really has helped to grow the influence of the science program and made possible many of the collaborative efforts that we have. In addition to supporting the lead scientist, I'd say Reiner's support within the staff is unbelievable. So he really has done all that he can to mentor and lead the staff, and the staff really looks to Reiner for support, for guidance, and is extremely indebted to all that he's done to grow the science program and to be so supportive of the growth of the science staff. He's definitely a creative, insightful person. I'd say, you know, Reiner has the unusual mix of being a really excellent, qualified scientist, as well as someone who understands the challenges and the issues of getting work done, the way to work through the logistics and bureaucracy and make things happen. So there's not many scientists who have that mix of skills. So he's truly creative in solving problems. I know he's going to be missed by the science program, but I know that everyone is very excited for you, Reiner, that you'll have a chance to enjoy your retirement, do some traveling, and really stay engaged and stay active. I know Reiner's already talking about the kinds of things he'd like to be doing and kinds of projects he wants to stay involved with. So I'm sure we will see Reiner, given his interest in the Bay and the Delta, I'm sure we'll see him despite the fact that he's leaving. So thank you very much, Reiner.
And I wanted to thank Bethany in particular for keeping me on target, because sometimes I have a tendency to be a little too creative. And
I'll miss you most of all, Reiner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Reiner, I want to personally thank you for all the science stuff that you gave me, which I probably didn't understand half of it, but you were patient. But I think it's important for me as a Delta Protection Commission representative to say, when I came on board, I came here thinking, okay, I listened to a lot of my colleagues, and all of you that work here at the Stewardship Council have proven them wrong, and you are very good at what you do, and it's a very difficult effort that we have before us here at the council. So I just wanted to thank you from this one guy that came in with maybe a prejudgment opinion of staff, but you and your colleagues have certainly changed my opinion. So I wanted to thank you on that.
thank you.
I found out early on in my chairmanship that Reiner and I had roots in Merced County. I think, Reiner, when you first arrived in California, you went to work for the Veldhuis Dairy, which is within a little more than a stone's throw, but pretty close to where I live. And there was a natural affinity, you know, because there are not a lot of us from Merced County that are serving in government up here. you have been so instrumental and helpful to me, both as the chair of the Stewardship Council and as the chair of DPIC. One of the great successes of DPIC has been threading science through everything we do there. And your advice to me, your wise counsel, your big thinking has helped guide those processes to the success that they have been. So thank you for your service. Thank you for your friendship. Look forward to staying in touch and maybe get an invitation to Napa.
Yep. I'll go back to my ag roots.
Yeah, good. All right.
Yeah, let me add, Reiner, I think we got involved in this organization at the same time.
Yeah.
Wasn't
I remember that very
you were
distinctly.
Just starting and I was just starting.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to say you're a remarkable counselor and teacher, and you will be missed by this council.
I'll miss this place too. It's bittersweet.
Okay. And
All right. Well, thank you very much for the $2 million.
and with that, I conclude my executive officer's report.
Okay. Any requests for public comment on this item? All right, then we're on to item 6, lead scientist report, Dr. John Callaway.
Great, thank you. I thank you very much for approving that. The money, as Reiner said, coming together, the Bureau, CDFW, and the council really coming together for this is a major step forward. And as Reiner said, we already have a large number of proposals in process, and the solicitation closes on Friday. So at our next meeting, I can update you on that. And I also do want to thank Josh Israel, who's here, for really making things happen on the Bureau side, because it definitely is a challenge linking those state and federal agencies. And although I know we all wanted to make it happen and we thought it would be relatively easy, it is a challenge, but we've made it. And we do have, I think, a really great solicitation that's out there. One other thing I want to highlight just before I start talk about some of the issues that are in your binder is a few weeks ago a report came out from the IPCC on climate change issues and the challenge of keeping climate change in the framework of 1.5 degrees Celsius rather than 2 degrees Celsius, and really highlights the immediate challenges and the impacts of current climate change already and the potential future climate change in the coming decade or two. And I won't go into details on that, but I do want to let you know at next month's council meeting, I'll give you an overview and highlight, because I think that's a really important and timely report that's come out. So I have 2 papers that I did want to talk to you about that came out recently. One is Managing for Salmon Resilience in California's Variable and Changing Climate, addressing climate change and salmon issues here in the Central Valley and in the state. This came out in San Francisco Estuary and Watershed Science just in August. And it is a multi-authored paper led by Bruce Herbold, who used to be at the US EPA and is now a consultant. And this is a result of a workshop that was put together by the council in 2015. So this paper is a summary, long-awaited summary of their work, and I just want to highlight some of their findings. So really what they identify is that salmon are actually very well adapted to California's variable climate and mix of habitats, but as we've impacted the ecosystem, their ability to respond and to recover from climate change is really diminished. And that's due to all the kinds of impacts that we've already talked about, impacts to water flow, access to habitat, invasive species, degradation of the remaining habitat, contaminants, genetic issues, food web support. And so, whereas they have evolved to deal with droughts and other kinds of variability, their ability to recover from those is significantly diminished. And they highlight, from their workshop, they highlight 4 general ways, broad ways that we could improve conditions for salmon. They identify that improving access to upstream habitats, whether that means removing dams in particular cases, providing access around dams, or in particular, where that isn't an opportunity and where there really is a need, the approach of trap and haul, or capturing the adults and moving them past the dam into the upper part of the watershed. So those are some opportunities for access to upstream habitats. They identify that we need to really think about reducing stress and improving the condition or the health of of individuals within the species. Two primary ways to do that is through temperature management within the watershed, and providing increased food availability, and clearly restoration is an opportunity where we can increase that refuges and opportunities access to food and food web support. So those are two areas where we could address that overall health and condition of the species. Then they identify that we really need to think about managing conditions to support a mix of life history stages, so different, rather than have like we talked about last time, having a single pulse of individuals coming down at one time. A mix of them at different times and different ages is likely to create a portfolio of effect so that they're more resilient and able to recover from impacts. They highlight that creating a mix of habitat, a diversity of habitats within the watershed, is probably the best way we can do that, so that they have a refuge and opportunity so they don't have to move down through the watershed in a single pulse. And then they identify issues related to artificial propagation and hatcheries. They don't really have any specific recommendations here. Actually, last time we talked about the marked selective fisheries. That's not mentioned, although it has been considered in the past. But they identify that we really need to think about how we manage our hatcheries in a more effective way, so that we, rather than reducing diversity, we maintain the diversity of the wild runs while we're also supporting hatchery populations. So any questions or any thoughts on that paper? Ken?
John, there was an article I just read before I left the house to come here. And it was online in the Sacramento Bee, and it discusses, I don't know if anyone else has seen this, but it discusses, did you see it? But Mike has seen it. The reporter talks about a decision made by a federal judge in Washington, the state of Washington. And the astounding figures is hundreds of thousands of salmon were basically cooked and killed in the Columbia River. Poached. Poached.
That's what the article said. The article said poached.
Poached. In any event, well, that's much more accurate, I suppose. But be that as it may, they said it would have an enormous impact on pending litigation, federal litigation here in California, and it would also have an enormous impact on the board's decision with respect to unimpaired flows. But it was shocking, the numbers of salmon that actually were poached in this. I mean, that really caught your eye. It was a fairly lengthy article, and I presume, based on what the reporter was saying, that this is a very significant decision by this judge in Washington, federal judge. I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. I didn't see that, but I will definitely look at it and update you on that.
Kind of reinforces the temperature control point.
Yes, certainly. That's a major issue.
Yeah, I guess I have a basic question about this report and then last month's report. You know, are these concepts included, and maybe this is just me not knowing enough, you know, in salmon recovery plans? I mean, we hear mostly about temperature control, and, you know, you've been bringing forward that these are key, you know, these are other attributes, these are other levers that need to be pulled. Is this reflected anywhere? Is this, you know, and I'll pull it back as I try to do to the ecosystem restoration amendment. You know, are we going to reflect that there? But then the question is, is anybody doing anything with this, and is the sense of urgency, or is there a sense of urgency about taking these actions?
So I would say there certainly is a sense of urgency, and these kinds of issues are being considered in terms of restoration projects, hatchery management up in the watershed. So I would say yes, they are. I would also say within the ecosystem amendment, we're definitely aware, thinking about these issues, thinking about the combination of restoration issues, along with flow issues, along with the hatcheries that are a part of the current ecosystem chapter. So I'd say we are aware and trying to incorporate these issues as much as possible.
But there's no overall recovery plan, that the resource agencies have agreed to, or
well, they're the biological opinions that set those up,
right?
And that.
So, but are they looking at these types of approaches?
Yes,
so
I would say yes.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so then the second paper that I wanted to highlight is Patterns, Pace, and Processes of Water Quality Variability in a Long-Studied Estuary. This is by Jim Klern from the U.S. Geological Survey, who has a long history of working in the Bay and the Delta on water quality issues. And what's unique about this paper is this is really a synthesis of long-term data from the IEP, from the Interagency Ecological Program, using over 40 years of data. Within, he focused specifically at one station to evaluate a long-term trend in a range of water quality characteristics. The station is right on the edge of Sassoon Bay, coming into the Delta. And I think one of the key take-home messages of this paper is just the value of this long-term data to provide insight and understanding that goes into our broader term management issues. One of the key points that he makes, so he looked at a range of different characteristics or parameters that are measured at this station: salinity, temperature, nutrient characteristics, dissolved oxygen, chlorophyll, or the amount of phytoplankton that is in the water there. And one thing that he stresses is just looking at trends, at changes over time, isn't really enough. We need to, if we want to understand and get some insight, we need to look at processes and correlate relationships and finer scale patterns. So he did show that the impacts that, or the changes that have occurred over time, there's been large scale 50% increase in nitrogen over 42 years, 74% decrease in chlorophyll over 42 years, and a 45% decrease in suspended sediment over that same 42-year period. So some of those really large-scale changes that have occurred, phosphorus, although nitrogen has increased, phosphorus hasn't changed, but in looking at some of the finer scale changes, what he showed is that through the early 90s, phosphorus actually was increasing significantly, and then with a shift to non-phosphate-based detergents and other sources of phosphorus, that it's actually started to go down. So he highlights that you really need to look at those finer scale patterns over annual periods, even looking to see within a year how things are changing, and using a variety of different approaches. So you need both the long-term data set, a high-quality long-term data set that's provided by the IEP's work, and then you need a mix of different approaches and analytical tools to understand some of the finer scale shifts that really gives insight that will help us to understand how can we manage the system better, how can we go about addressing some of these shifts that have occurred. And it also really, in this, it really highlights the value of the data and highlights the need to continue these monitoring stations despite potential cuts in funding. We really need to think about what's the basic information that we need to have in order to understand these ecosystem dynamics. So any questions or any thoughts on that paper?
Mr. Chair. Doc?
Yes.
I have somewhat of a basic question. In the first paragraph it says, in late 50s, showing early warnings of climate change and continued evidence of atmospheric changes associated with burning of fossil fuels. Okay, all this data is being collected for over 40 years. How is this data getting to those of us that are the policy makers, deciders? I mean, this is 40 years that passed, and we're still at the same spot.
So I think these kinds of syntheses are really what we need to be doing more of, and we need to be doing on a more timely basis. so that we can make that information available to, first we have to do the synthesis so that we begin to understand it, and then we can use it and make it available for a management decision.
40, 50, 60 years of analysis before we...
Well, no, so I think there's value both in looking at these longer term trends as well as shorter term trends. So, I mean, I would say, clearly a year or two isn't going to tell us much, but within a decade, I think we can begin to see some of the dynamics that are occurring. We'll get at one thing this paper points out, if we only look at a decade, we get a very different message. So I think there's value in looking across those different time scales.
I think I'm guessing that what Skip is getting to is in the first paragraph, it indicates that from the CO2 data in the late 50s, there were early warnings. And in terms, from a policymaker's viewpoint, at what point will the scientists share the data while processing and moving towards synthesis, or in drafts there, you said that we ought to share it in a more timely manner. Do you have any thoughts on what more timely would look like? And I think part of it is there's a mistrust in the general public in terms of the extent of climate change. There were articles a couple years ago that the scientists were quote-unquote hiding the facts. So there's this delicate balance of not relating the data to the general public too soon, and yet keeping the public informed as scientists complete their analyses.
Yeah, so so that example from Hawaii, from the long-term monitoring there, that data's been available in public for decades and decades. So it's not that it took 50 years to make it available. It may have taken some time for people to become aware of it. So I think there's no intention to hide any of the data, and I think there's much more interest and much more awareness now of making data available as rapidly as possible. So, AB 1755 in the state and other efforts across the country and across the globe have really pushed to make the data available, and then the challenge is in synthesizing and interpreting the data in a timely way. And I don't think there's any specific formula of it. It should be done in 6 months or it should be done in a year. It really depends on the issue. It depends on the relevancy of that issue to management decisions. So I think some of it is a large part of it obviously is guided by what we are concerned about and when we need to turn that data into information and into knowledge that can provide some of the policy interpretations. But I think, I mean, my feeling is in the immediate short term, there's definitely some issues of scientists may not want to give up their data, but over the longer term, and especially with much more awareness of public access to data, that we're moving in a direction where data is becoming available extremely rapidly. The challenge is really keeping up with it. Any other questions? Okay, so I have two other items briefly to talk about. One is, as you all know, last month was the Bay Delta Science Conference, and I just want to give you some highlights from that conference. So we had, that is the highlight of the year for Bay Delta scientists and managers, and it truly is an opportunity for scientists and managers to come together to think about the critical issues here in the Bay Delta, in the entire estuary. We had over 1,000 attendees from agencies, academia, private sector, and beyond. In terms of the, included in your report is some of the responses that came back in terms of evaluations of the conference. Overall, extremely positive. The ISB just recently did a review of the conference for us, and also I included just a quote from their summary highlighting the value of the conference, and both in terms of the quality of the information that is presented and the opportunity to discuss some of these important science management issues. In particular, this year, the plenary, the first morning was unusual in that it really went beyond the typical science focus. It had a focus on social science issues, a presentation on the value of social science in understanding and evaluating the impacts and effectiveness of restoration from up in the Puget Sound. It had a presentation on adaptive management from the Colorado River, and a presentation on effective science communication. So it really was broader, intentionally broader than some of the previous conferences. There was a strong effort also to incorporate students into the conference. There was a mentor lunch that was very well attended and well received. There was poster awards and presentation awards to students for best posters and best oral presentations. There was an art and science component, and also a training for science communication. So a really broad range. And the topics came across from everything that you might expect of fish biology and restoration to climate change, water quality, invasive species, a broad range of presentations. I want to just highlight, I presented to the state board just a couple weeks ago, and I highlighted a few of the presentations there, so I want to just briefly mention some of them so you get a feeling of some of the kinds of presentations that occurred. So Eric Chapman from his colleagues from UC Davis gave a highlight of restoration efforts and water management efforts on Puda Creek. He provided an update on Puda Creek, where I think many of you are aware of, since about 2009, there's been an increase in flow. Early 2000s, increase in targeted flows within the creek that have really had significant benefits on native species. And what Eric showed was that since 2014, salmon have begun to use the creek. Prior to 2014, there were less than 10 salmon ever captured in recent times on the creek. Since 2014, hundreds of fish each year, up to 1,600 fish in 2016, have been going up the creek. And they've also been, just in the last year, measuring the juveniles that are coming down, and 35,000 juveniles are coming down the creek. So amazing that a combination of the flow increases and the available habitat, that more and more native species, including salmon, are actually using that habitat. There was modeling effort presented by John DeGeorge. Did you have a question?
I just wanted to make a comment. The additional flows that went down Puda Creek was a result of a hard-fought legal battle between Solano County Water Agency and the Lower Puda Creek Coordinating Council back in the early 2000s. And I was the only dissenter of the SQUA lawsuit against Lower Puda Creek. I actually went with the Puda Creek Council, and so I felt vindicated when the lawsuit was resolved. But it's one of those issues that the water flowing down Puda Creek is expensive water that can be sold. So you have this battle between urban needs and the environment. And I think the settlement was one that really, in the end, showed that the environment should be given the same consideration as those living in the cities and requiring the water. So it was a hard-fought battle, but it was one that really resulted in a good outcome.
Yeah, excellent. Any other questions on that? The second presentation I wanted to highlight was by John DeGeorge from RMA Consulting, and he's a hydrologic modeler, and what he showed was he was looking at the effects of levee breaches on local flow as well as on regional flow within the Delta. And actually this is work that the science program has been supporting. And what he showed was that a breach at a local island or a group of islands obviously has effects on hydrology and water quality issues locally, but what he showed with his modeling, and that's confirmed with some observations, is that those effects could be felt 10 to 20 miles away, have an effect on the tidal range, on the net flow, as well as the salinity. And so he really highlighted the need to think about how we, as both the impacts of accidental breaches as well as we're planning restoration, how those restoration activities in one location will have broader effects within the Delta. And then the third presentation to highlight was one by Larry Brown and colleagues from the USGS, from the Bureau of Reclamation, DWR, and UC Davis. This actually was, he summarized a whole 2 series of presentations looking at understanding the connections between physical characteristics and habitat characteristics and fish use in the upper cash flow and the lower Yolo bypass. Yeah, that they called that physics to fish. So they were looking at how the hydrology, they compared sites with different hydrology. Generally what they found was that areas with dendritic creeks with a lot of adjacent marsh supported the kinds of flow that's more likely to support higher levels of productivity. The water stays in that region for a longer period of time, so it allows for phytoplankton to begin to grow and then supports the food web. And they found that that results in higher densities of fish as well. And then actually what they've also seen is that the native fish are more likely to be found close to tidal creeks. So if you have a network of tidal creeks and marsh, you're more likely to support native fish than if you have a big open pond. And so they were able to really show that we're beginning to understand much more, on a much more focused level, how to create the kinds of habitat to support native fish within the Delta. So any questions on any of those? Those are just some examples. There actually was a great summary that was done by the Estuary News highlighting 20 or more articles, and I'll forward that around because it's a real good summary of, if you're interested in looking at some more of the presentations.
I just have a comment. I attended the conference, and like John says, it was a good mix of sort of the bigger picture policy issues and the more specific scientific study results and presentations. But I really want to point out to my fellow council members that John was just such a leading voice at that conference in terms of his participation. I mean, I think a lot of the science people really looked towards John. In the plenary session, you had a key role. John moderated a really interesting panel on with Felicia Marcus, the chair of the State Water Board, and Jeff Mount, and I know there was somebody else there, but
Carl Wilcox
from California Department of Fish and Wildlife, and it was these were the big policy issues that they were talking about, but also you got a feel, and I definitely had a saturation point, a feel for why the detailed work that's going on is so important, and we had staff there making presentations. So just so everybody knows, the council had not only as a sponsor but as a participant had a very high profile. One other point that I was really encouraged, I was surprised by the number of people that turned out, that the Delta science community was that large. I think over 1,100 people, but the poster sessions and then the students that were participating, I mean, there's a great farm system that's out there, and just fantastic work being done. So that was really heartening for the future. We used to have high school science people came to my water agency. We do a contest every year, and just the brain power of those high school kids it would just blow me away. There's just a lot of smart people, and I think we're able to recruit them into the type of biological sciences that are so important to what the council does. So it was a good experience.
Great. Thank you, Ken. Appreciate your comments. And I think, yeah, it is amazing that the young students coming into the program, and that I think we do have lots of great minds that will move us forward. Okay, the last thing I'm going to mention is the recent symposium that we held on ecological and physiological impacts of salinization of aquatic ecosystems. And this was jointly done with UC Davis, with their Center for Coastal and Marine Science Institute, This was a broad workshop and symposium to really look at drivers of increasing salinity, not just within the delta, but within other kinds of coastal estuarine ecosystems, and then trying to understand how those shifts in salinity, what the resulting impacts are on organisms, how organisms have responded and are adapting and evolving, and what some of the implications might be for management issues. And I think really, the take-home messages were just the shifts that have occurred within salinity within the estuary over time, and understand the need to look across a mix of different issues, kind of like with the physics to fish, really looking at both the salinity issues and impacts on organisms. And if you're interested, that is it's available that you could watch any of the presentations online, and there will be a summary document coming out that the workshop participants are working on, and is just underway. So, any questions? Okay, great. Then I will turn it over to Amanda, and she's going to give you an overview of By the Numbers.
Can I go ahead? All right. Good afternoon, council members, and Happy New Year.
Good
New
afternoon.
water year, that is.
Oh, nice.
Which began on October 1st. So today I'll briefly go over this month's numbers, present a recap of water year 2018, and also give you a quick update on Nutria in California. We've gotten a bit of precipitation over the last month, which is at about 50% of average for both the northern and central Sierra regions. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration has predicted a weak to moderate El Nino for this winter. However, what exactly that means for California is less certain. The whole state is likely to experience warmer than average temperatures, but the chance of either a drier or wetter winter across most of the state is currently about equal. There isn't any snowpack. Oops, I moved on too quickly there. There isn't any snowpack to report yet, and water temperatures are the same or slightly higher than the averages for the last 7 to 10 years. Similar to last month, Shasta and Oroville reservoirs are both below average for this time of year, while San Luis is higher than average. And this month we're seeing above average flows for the Sacramento River, and well below average flows for the San Joaquin River. However, flow did increase in the San Joaquin this month, and this value is not at all unusual for this time of year. One possible reason for the higher than average flows in the Sacramento River could be temperature control. And for the water projects, diversions were slightly above average and consistent with values for the last couple months. Salinity values remained similar to last month in the Sacramento River and at Banks Pumping Plant. However, in the San Joaquin River, salinity went back down from last month, likely a result of increased flows. So now if you would please turn to the next page of your handout, I'm going to present a brief recap of water year 2018, followed by a Nutria update. Total precipitation and peak snowpack were both below average in the Northern Sierra and Central Sierra regions, and snowpack in both the Northern Sierra and Central Sierra reached peak levels in March. Percentages of average reservoir storage range from 89 to 120% at Shasta, 55 to 83% at Oroville, and 90 to 146% at San Luis. In the Sacramento River, represented with the blue lines there, highest flows were observed in April and were well above average, while the lowest flows were in May and much lower than average. Salinity in the Sacramento River remained low throughout the year. In the San Joaquin River, represented with the red lines, highest flows were also observed in April and were right around average, while the lowest flows were in August and much below average. And salinity in the San Joaquin River was highest in January. Finally, the water projects, represented with the green lines, diverted the least amount of water on average in May and the most in September. And these amounts were both similar to average diversions for those months. Salinity measured at Banks Pumping Plant was highest in January and September. All right, so that wraps up our water year 2018 recap. And now last but certainly not least, I have a quick Nutria update for you. So as of October 11th, the California Department of Fish and Wildlife successfully trapped their 300th nutria in California. This includes 12 nutria taken from San Joaquin County and at least 2 from within the legal delta. And this includes at least 1 additional nutria since the last update I gave you in July for the delta. And for more information on nutria in California, please visit the website on the handout or here on the screen. And for anyone interested, there will also be a special presentation from CDFW on the nutria infestation and eradication efforts in California at the Delta Plan Interagency Implementation Committee meeting, or DPIC meeting, on November 5th. Thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Amanda, thank you for mentioning the November 5th DPIC meeting. As we have been conducting our pre-meetings with each of the agencies, it's come to our attention that nutria is an issue that needs a greater level of rigor, and we intend to recommend establishing a multi-agency work group authorized by the DPIC agency members to focus on nutria. So in addition to the report that we're going to be getting, hopefully there will be a work group set up to rally the resources necessary to eradicate this varmint that tastes like fish. Ken?
Yeah, sorry for delaying your presentation. What I was doing, I was asking Randy, since he's the expert, to point out where Vernalis is, but it's not on my Delta map. But if we could go back to the water quality.
It's near Westlake.
Okay, I'll find it later. I just want or even the current levels on your by the numbers. It was interesting that you pointed out that, and this is a Southern California point I want to make, since all 3 Southern Californians are on this end of the dais. The salinity, and if looking at parts per million, just so people understand, at Banks, 275 to 425 is typically higher than what we see. And the importance there is that when you get about over 500 parts per million, you start seeing effects on consumer appliances. You may see it on irrigation, on recycled water use. And the other source for 19 million Southern Californians is the Colorado River, which is higher in salinity. Could be 600, 700. So this water, the goal is to try and get it around 500. So that, I think that's, when we talk about water quality, that's the Southern California perspective. We're not getting, the Freeport water quality is that's great. And you mentioned, Amanda, that the Vernalis number dropped this last month, but the combined is still high, and I don't want to put people on the spot, but if you don't have the answer, but what's going on between Vernalis and Banks that's raising the salinity? Is it just low flow, or it's interesting just because the upstream quality is so much higher, but I'm pointing it out because this is where you get to the point where you start to have water quality impacts in Southern California, and there's 19 million people in Southern California that are affected by that, and this is why it's a important issue, and the relativity of what's good water quality or not depends where you are in the state. You know, we certainly 500 parts per million is great for us. We're not looking for, you know, things that are lower, but this is when, you know, you'll hear concern. So I don't know what quite is going on. You know, maybe we can come back next month with that answer.
Yeah, we can look into that. I'm not certain why the big difference between Vernalis and at the pumps.
Yeah, because I thought it would be San Joaquin, higher
they-
salinity would be contributing, but that doesn't seem to be the case.
But the salinities now are probably as high as they will be, because once we start to get some rain, we'll start to see things go down. So as you indicated, they're still below the 500 ppm level of some concern.
Yeah.
And
well, because it's blending water in Southern California, and you got higher salinity Colorado River water, you know, the higher the salinity of this water, the less you can blend it down, and there are consumer impacts and other impacts. So I'm just kind of making a point here just to put this in context that, you know, this is what we look at. And this is why I kind of push to, can we express this in parts per million, because that gives us a better idea of what we're dealing with.
The way that the values at Freeport and Vernalis also for the past few years have been reported slightly differently than at Banks, but we've now figured out that there is data available that is exactly the same for all of the three, and so by next month we hope to report those values instead.
Okay.
So we might get a better idea after that if that's really true or not.
Okay, thank you. I'll get a better map that shows Vernalis.
okay, that concludes. Any other questions? Okay, that concludes our report.
Thank you, John. Any requests for public comment on file item number 6? There are none. This brings us to file item number 7, public comment on any matter. I see none. Thank you for coming. This meeting is adjourned.